The palace always smelled of jasmine and old stone. She had scrubbed those same marble floors for nearly a decade, her hands raw with the labor. The other servants called her Ash Dress, not because her uniform was gray, but because it was always dusted with soot from the chimneys she often volunteered to clean. Her real name was known only to the palace registry, and perhaps to the stars. No one noticed her, not really. Not when she moved silently past the gold-framed mirrors. Not when she dipped her bucket at the courtyard's fountain. Not even when she whispered lullabies to the mice in the pantry. As she worked late into the night, her anonymity was a fortress. She both resented and depended on until that morning. The emperor's youngest son, barely 7 winters old, collapsed in the middle of court. Convulsions seized his small frame as he gasped for air. The physicians came, white-robed and grim. Whispers circled like vultures, poison, curses, rebellion. Ash Dress had been dusting the lower galleries when it happened. From the shadows, she watched as the royal family panicked. Then the emperor himself, high on his days, barked an impossible command. "Bring me a body double, a woman. She will take his place for the journey." They all hesitated. The journey meant travel through the warlands to reach the sea temple, where the cure, if it even existed, could be found. But it was treacherous, and the boy could not travel. That's when the emperor's eyes landed on her. "You, cleaner, come forward." Ash Dress froze, bristles of her broom tangled in a tapestry. "You will wear the ceremonial robes. You will go in his place, and if you fail, no one will mourn." The robes were to fine for her skin. They shimmered like mist and bled light into the chamber. As the handmaidens bathed and perfumed her, they avoided her eyes. When the fabric wrapped around her shoulders, she no longer looked like a cleaner. She looked like a ghost of someone. Royal. They fitted her with a veil. The emperor gave her only one thing, not a blessing, not protection. A ring, his son's ring, to prove her authority in negotiations. The caravan left at dawn. She rode in silence, flanked by stone-faced guards, and a translator who never spoke unless she asked. The robes, heavy with embroidery, dragged against the frost of the early spring air. Her identity was hidden, her name unspoken. In every village they passed, people bowed. In the 5th village, bandits attacked. They were poor and starving, their clothes stitched from moss and bark. One of them tore her veil aside, revealing her soot-smeared face. For a second, no one moved. Then the bandit dropped to one knee, a woman who wears the crown, but bears the scars of work. "You are the one the old legends spoke of." She had no idea what he meant, but the ring, the emperor's son's ring, shimmered in her fist. She survived. Barely. A guard died protecting her. They buried him in silence beside a hill of violets. As they neared the sea temple, negotiations were prepared. The monks of the temple were powerful, secretive. They would demand tribute. They would demand truth. She would be expected to speak on behalf of the empire. On the night before the meeting, the translator gave her a gift, a folded piece of parchment. On it were words in her own dialect, a tongue so old it had been banned from court. A lullaby. Her hands trembled as she realized someone remembered. Someone knew who she truly was. The next day, the sea temple opened its obsidian gates. She entered alone. She was given a seat carved from salt. Before her stood the monks, draped in shadow, marked with inked runes. "Speak, daughter of empire." One intoned. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came, not a whisper, not a breath. She had lost her voice. The monks watched, unmoved. Then one of them stepped forward and held out a chalice. She stared at it, lips parted, her voice still gone. But then, she remembered the ring. Ash Dress lifted it high, the sunlight, catching the carved phoenix. The monks fell to their knees. The silent one has come. The prophecy is fulfilled. And outside, somewhere far beyond the mountains, the emperor's son stirred in his sleep, color returning to his cheeks. Ash Dress, no longer a cleaner, would not return as a decoy. She would return as a queen the people had forgotten they needed. The golden sunlight that spilled across the imperial court was colder than usual. The wind moved like judgment, rattling banners and robes alike as courtiers gathered. But the girl standing by the tall windows did not flinch. She was just a cleaner, And yet, somehow, the emperor had placed her here. She stood beside the prince. She shouldn't have. Everyone knew it. The boy, barely 10, clung to her hand. I don't want them to take me away. She knelt and tucked his loose sash in tighter. They won't. I'll stay beside you. A lie. She didn't know that. Not anymore. 3 days ago. She'd been scrubbing soot from palace chimneys. Then came the fire in the East Wing. The trapped prince, the emperor's silent rival, and her impossible decision. Her uniform ruined, lungs scorched, hands burned. She'd used the emperor's own cloak to shield the boy. He'd looked at her with no emotion. "Take my cloak," he had said, not to her, but to the guards, "and give her something better to wear. The golden dress, the one she wore now. A cleaner dressed as a noblewoman, absurd. Even worse, she was to escort the prince to the border negotiations. The boy's nurse had disappeared, poisoned, bribed only. She had been trusted at the negotiation table. In a marble hall that smelled of cold wine and polished swords, the opposing delegates sat like wolves circling prey. One woman spoke. She wore red, the kind that looked like wet rubies. "The child is too young to rule. Send him to us. We'll raise him with neutral guidance." Gasps. The prince squeezed the cleaner's hand. She opened her mouth. No sound came. None. Her throat locked like she'd swallowed ice. Her heart raced, but her tongue remained still. Words curled behind her teeth but froze there. She tried again. Nothing. The Empress Dowager, seated nearby, noticed. "Speak, girl. You were the one who saved the heir." All eyes turned. She tried to speak again and again. No voice came. Panic built. Her knees buckled. The prince pulled on her dress, whispering, "Please don't leave." A hand caught her, a warm one. The emperor had stood. "She has lost her voice, but that does not mean she cannot speak." He raised his own hand, and from his sleeves came a folded paper, crumpled, but clearly familiar. Her handwriting, the letter she'd written for the prince the night before. A lullaby in writing. Really, about stars and safety. The emperor. Read it aloud, in a voice low and filled with pride. "The sky will not fall while I still breathe, and no prince shall cry alone." Silence followed, deep and aching. Then, slowly, the woman in red sat back. "We withdraw the demand later." Behind embroidered curtains, the emperor found her again. "I do not understand," she whispered, her voice returning in a crackle. "Why me?" He tilted his head. "You weren't chosen. You chose us first." She blinked. "I remember you," he said softly. "You were the one who knelt when my father died. Not as a courtier, as someone who knew how to grieve." The air was too warm. Her breath shook. "You gave the prince your food when his mother passed. You tucked him in during storms. The boy remembers what power forgets." He touched the edge of her golden sleeve. "You've always been the better part of our kingdom, and for a long time." They said nothing more, but her tears spoke for her, and the emperor let them. She stood beneath the frost-laced archway of the Eastern Palace, her borrowed shoes caked with the soil of 2 worlds, one of soot, one of silk. The hem of the emperor's gift dress still shimmered, though dull now, threadbare after its second washing. Yet it remained her armor. The courtiers looked past her. They always did. A cleaner in gold was still, to them, just a cleaner, except one. "Come," said the emperor's son. Not a boy anymore, but not a man allowed to speak freely either. "You are late." "I wasn't told the meeting time," she answered quietly. "The page only left a note by my door." He blinked once. The lines around his mouth deepened. "You weren't meant to attend at all," he said at last. "Then why am I here?" He didn't answer. But when she stepped into the chamber and saw the delegation seated across the great table, golden robes like suns, curved helmets, black veined scrolls and blades wrapped in prayer threads, she understood. She wasn't here for her words. She was here because she had no voice. A sacrifice does not speak. They knew her face. The foreign ministers turned to look at her, eyes narrowing. She saw the glint of recognition in their translators' eyes, the smallest flicker in the elder priest's expression. A cleaner, the one who had gone missing for 3 days after the imperial heir had been poisoned, the one who'd returned wearing his seal ring and a dress to find a wash. Rumors had followed her like shadows. Today, she was a weapon, or perhaps bait. And still she met their gaze. Her voice failed her, yes, but not her spine. The meeting was an ice storm of veiled threats and ritual phrasing. "We are deeply honored to sit in this chamber of remembrance," said the priest with his too calm smile, "though we note that some of its architecture leans less neutral than we hoped." A jab at the imperial lions carved into the doorframes. "Stone leans where it was shaped," the emperor replied, "but it does not move unless someone strikes it." The translator tilted his head, and would the stone strike back? There were chuckles from both sides, tension laced with amusement, but beneath it, blood waited to spill. She watched the conversation bend like metal under stress. The emperor was not in good health. His hand trembled when he lifted his cup. The sun was steady, yes, but too young, and the foreign delegation knew it. They pressed delicately, but persistently until the old priest's hand fell, deliberately, on the scroll he had yet to open, a death sentence, if it was what she feared. The emperor opened his mouth, but his breath hitched. Pain flickered across his brow so the cleaner stood. "I will read it," she said. Silence rippled across the marble floor. Her hands did not shake when she took the scroll. By the 9th seal of harmony and the 8th clause of the Sci-Fi Pact, she began, the undersigned demand the restoration of the Ashwind Hills, the redress of border raids, and a return of the imperial heir to their custody until such grievances are resolved. The entire chamber shifted. She did not stop. They also seek trial in accordance with the foreign rights of the one who bore the heir across borders without consent. And now it was clear. She was not just bait. She was the demand. She looked up, expecting the emperor's rage or the son's despair. But the emperor's eyes were closed. And the son? He stood. "She did not bear me across the border," he said. "She dragged me through a broken tunnel to safety, when your knives had already slit my guards' throats." The elder priest's face twisted. "That has not been proven." The prince's voice rose. "And yet I breathe. Is that not proof?" She turned toward him, the scroll still in her hands. "Will you speak for me?" she whispered, but he shook his head. "No, I will speak with you." And for the first time in the chamber's long, cold history, someone offered her a seat, not as bait, not as witness, but as voice, as equal. She did not weep, but the emperor did, and the priest burned the scroll. The sun over the imperial capital rose gold and soft, brushing the horizon with fire as bells chimed throughout the palace grounds. The city below stirred like a creature waking from sleep, unaware that the fate of the empire teetered on what would happen behind the palace's walls, inside the marble-walled nursery of the ailing prince. The scent of crushed lavender filled the air. The boy lay curled like a fallen star among silken pillows, fever still clinging to his brow. Beside him sat the woman who was once a cleaner, now dressed in robes not quite noble, yet no longer common. Her hands were clasped around a woven charm. She hadn't left his side for 2 days. The court physicians had whispered to each other. Uselessly, remedies had failed. Incantations fizzled. The boy's condition defied tradition. And so, as hope dwindled, the emperor's last command had been spoken in private. "Bring her." The one with soot on her hem and stars in her breath. She had no name they used aloud, only titles whispered behind lacquered fans. The laundress oracle, the girl with the golden cough, the one who knelt and changed fate. No longer did she clean floors, but she still didn't speak. Not a word, not even a whisper. The emperor, cloaked in dark velvet, entered the nursery with eyes sharp and troubled. Behind him, generals, ministers, and a holy envoy trailed like shadows. At the boy's side, the woman looked up, her eyes rimmed with fatigue but glowing with a quiet defiance. "She will not speak," one general asked, incredulous. "Even now, she does not need to," said the emperor, with delicate fingers. She placed the woven charm beneath the child's head. Then she did something strange. She pressed her lips to the boy's forehead, an action no one had dared. And in that silence, something shifted. A breeze swept through the room, though no window was open. The prince stirred. Gasps broke out. The holy envoy dropped to his knees. The boy opened his eyes. "Mother," he whispered hoarsely. "Did the moon sing to me?" The emperor turned, stunned. "Your Majesty," whispered his advisor. There are no more explanations left, only devotion. That night, in the hall of celestial negotiations, envoys from across the fractured kingdoms gathered. They expected political games. They expected cold treaties and veiled threats. But what they saw instead was a woman in humble robes standing beside the throne. "She is mute," the emperor announced, "but her silence saved my heir, so let her silence speak for our peace." When she stepped forward, placing a single lily at the table, every delegation stared. A flower, not a weapon. No words, no oaths, just an offering, and none dared refuse. One by one, the envoys placed flowers of their own. Later that night, in the quiet of the palace's inner courtyard, the emperor found her by the pond, the water, reflecting the sky like a sheet of longing. "Why do you still not speak?" he asked gently. She looked at him not with defiance, but with a fragile sort of ache. Then she pointed at the moon and mimicked sewing something with her fingers. "Words are stitches." He realized aloud. "And yours were torn?" She nodded once, then laid her hand on her heart. He stepped closer. "Would you let me help mend them?" For a long moment, she did not move. Then she reached out, placed her hand over his. The stars above flickered like they remembered something long forgotten. The marble hall was quiet now, silent, save for the low humming of starlight-refracted chandeliers and the distant throb of ceremonial drums. The delegation from Ordrast had departed. The Terran ambassadors, too, had withdrawn, and yet she remained. Calla stood at the center of the throne chamber, her plain shoes just barely scuffing the golden inlay of ancient treaties, still wearing the ceremonial dress the emperor had once handed her when she was nothing but a cleaner scrubbing the palace. Floors dot only now. It had become something more. The emperor, no longer seated, stood beside her, not as sovereign to subject, but as something else, something wordless, something fragile. "She will come," he said softly. Calla didn't answer. Her fingers were clenched at her sides. "She must," he added, almost to himself, "because if she doesn't, then the whole piece was built on borrowed light." The she in question was an Ivex, the Ordrastian High Chancellor, a woman known for swallowing empires and burning compromises to ash. She'd looked at Calla like she was nothing, less than nothing, until the dress, until Calla had stood, tall, voice trembling but true, in the negotiation hall and spoken of compassion not as a luxury, but a right, not as weakness, but strategy. That had stopped an eye cold, just for a second. And now, on the final day, with peace still unsigned and the Ordrast fleet lurking beyond the third moon, Calla waited. She remembered the Emperor's son, trembling in her arms weeks ago, fevered and pale from a neuroplague no Ordrast doctor had dared treat. It was Calla who'd broken the chamber seals, who'd carried the boy through toxic ash, who'd gotten him to the medbay and demanded a cure, a cleaner, in a borrowed uniform. "I gave her the dress because she gave me back my son," the Emperor had said, "and now she stands here for all of us." But that wasn't what scared Calla. It was what she felt when she stood beside him. The way her heart cracked and grew whenever he looked at her. Not like a symbol, but a woman. The doors creaked open, and Ivex entered. Alone. She wore ceremonial black, but her shoulders were uncovered. A gesture of vulnerability among her kind. Calla's throat tightened. "Cleaner," I said. Or shall I say, consort apparent. Calla felt the Emperor flinch behind her. "I speak only for myself," Calla said. "Not for him, not yet." I smirked. "But your silence in the last debate struck harder than a dozen warships. So here I am." She stepped forward, each footfall echoing like thunder. "You said once you understood hunger, that you knew what it meant to watch someone die of cold while nobles drank sunwine in towers." Inai's eyes narrowed. "So tell me, what do you say to the families my war will leave frozen beneath broken moons?" Calla didn't breathe. She stepped forward. Then she took off the dress. Not all at once, but the outer layers, the shimmering violet weave, the planetary silk folds, the imperial sash beneath. She wore her old gray cleaner's uniform, the one with the bleach stain across the left sleeve. "I say I've never stopped being her," Calla whispered. "I just learned to walk through palaces without forgetting what pain feels like." Silence. The Emperor made no move. This was her moment. Inai's eyes widened just slightly. Then, finally, you would come to Ordrast, speak to my war councils. I would come as a cleaner, Kala said, and I'll bring this dress, not to wear, but to hang on the wall, so you all remember what peace cost. Inai turned. Then it may be peace, she murmured, for now. She was gone. Kala stood trembling in her old uniform, and then his hand on hers, the Emperor. You don't need to wear it again, he said. That dress, the stars remember now. Her eyes brimmed. But what if they forget? He tilted, her face up. Then let me be the one who always remembers for them, and for you. And in a palace of marble and echoes, where once she'd mopped the floors, the Emperor took her hand not to lead, not to command, but to walk beside her into a future no one had written yet. Not a cleaner, not a consort, but a woman who'd worn truth like a crown.